December 15th, 1978, 2:47 a.m. The Stardust Hotel and Casino, Las Vegas. Frank Lawrence Rosenthal was sitting in his fourth-floor office reviewing the night's skim reports when his direct line rang. No secretary, no switchboard, just the phone that only 3 people in the world had the number to. Rosenthal picked up. He listened for 11 seconds. He hung up. He walked to his wall safe, removed $87,000 in cash, placed it in a leather briefcase, and left through the service elevator. He was in his Cadillac driving east on Flamingo Road by 2:53 a.m. The whole sequence took 6 minutes. This wasn't panic. This was protocol. Frank Rosenthal had just received word that the FBI had obtained wiretap authorization for the Stardust's count room. He had 4 hours before the warrant would be executed. 4 hours to move money, destroy records, and create plausible deniability for the Chicago outfit's entire Las Vegas operation. The skim that night was $28,000. By sunrise, it would be invisible. This is the story of Frank Lawrence Rosenthal, the greatest casino operator in Las Vegas history, and the man who invented modern sports betting in America. Robert De Niro played him in Casino. The movie made him look like a hothead who lost everything because of his wife's affair with Joe Pesci. That's Hollywood. But here's what Casino never told you. Frank Rosenthal didn't fail because of love or loyalty or pride. He failed because he was too good at his job. He built a system so efficient, so profitable, so mathematically perfect that it made the Chicago outfit $400 million over 12 years. And that kind of success attracts attention. From competitors, from regulators, from the FBI. Rosenthal's real crime wasn't running an illegal casino operation. It was running it too well. This is the story of how a Jewish kid from Chicago became the mob's most valuable asset in Nevada, how he transformed Las Vegas from a gambling town into a financial empire, and how the same brilliance that made him indispensable made him a target. Frank Rosenthal wasn't killed for betrayal. He survived because he was irreplaceable. But survival came with a cost most men wouldn't pay. Frank Lawrence Rosenthal was born June 12, 1929, in Chicago, Illinois. His father owned a small produce company on the South Side. His mother kept the books. The family was working class, but they weren't poor. They had a house. They had dinner on the table. They had expectations. Frank's older brother was going to be a lawyer. Frank was supposed to be an accountant. But by age 13, Frank Rosenthal had discovered something more interesting than balance sheets. He discovered probability theory, not in school, not from books, from watching his uncle's poker games in the back room of a neighborhood deli. Frank would sit in the corner doing homework while the men played 5-card stud. He noticed patterns. He saw that certain players bet aggressively with weak hands. Others folded too quickly with strong ones. He realized that poker wasn't about luck. It was about information, psychology, and mathematics. By age 14, Frank was running his own card games. Small stakes at first, nickels and dimes with kids from school. But Frank didn't play. He banked. He took a percentage of every pot. He made more money not playing than the winners made playing. That was Frank's genius from the beginning. He understood that the house always wins if the math is right. Frank attended Steinmetz High School on Chicago's northwest side. He was a mediocre student, B's and C's in most subjects. But in mathematics, he was exceptional. His algebra teacher noticed that Frank could calculate odds in his head faster than other students could do it on paper. She encouraged him to pursue engineering or actuarial science. Frank smiled and said, "Thank you." Then he dropped out at age 17 to work for the Chicago outfit. You have to understand what Chicago was in 1946. The city was an open gambling town. horse racing, sports betting, poker rooms, dice games, all operating with police and political protection. The Chicago outfit controlled it. They ran handbooks, bookmaking operations that took bets on sporting events out of barbershops, taverns, and social clubs across the South Side. Frank Rosenthal started as a runner. He collected betting slips from street-level bookies and delivered them to central counting houses. It was entry-level work. But Frank was smart. He paid attention. He learned how the operation worked. Here's how a 1940s Chicago handbook operated. Let's say you wanted to bet on a baseball game, Cubs versus Cardinals. You'd go to your neighborhood bookie, usually a guy working out of a barbershop or a corner store. You'd place your bet, $5 on the Cubs. The bookie would write your name, the bet, and the amount on a slip of paper. At the end of the day, the bookie would package all the slips and give them to a runner. The runner, guys like young Frank Rosenthal, would take the slips to a central counting house where bookkeepers would tally all the bets, calculate the house's exposure, and determine if they needed to lay off action with other bookmakers to balance the risk. The system worked, but it was inefficient. Too many people handling paper, too many opportunities for skimming, errors, and police raids. Frank saw the problems immediately, and he started proposing solutions. By age 19, Frank Rosenthal was managing a counting house for the outfit. He wasn't made, he wasn't Italian, he couldn't be a member, but he was valuable. He streamlined the betting slip system. He created standardized codes for different types of bets. He developed a primitive but effective method for balancing action across multiple handbooks, so the outfit's risk was always hedged. Bookmaking is just risk management. You want equal money on both sides of a bet. If $1,000 comes in on the Cubs and $1,000 comes in on the Cardinals, you're guaranteed profit because you're taking a 10% commission on the losing side. The loser pays $11,000, you pay the winner $1,000, you keep $1,000. No risk, pure profit. The problem is when action is unbalanced. If $2,000 comes in on the Cubs and only $5,000 comes in on the Cardinals, you have exposure. If the Cubs win, you're paying out $2,000 and only collecting $5,500 from the Cardinal bettors. You've lost $14,500. Frank Rosenthal understood that balancing action was more important than picking winners, and he was better at it than anyone in Chicago. By 1950, Frank was running the outfit's entire sports betting operation on the South Side. He was 21 years old. He was making $3,000 a week. That's $37,000 a week in 2025 dollars. Frank didn't flash it. He didn't buy cars or jewelry. He invested in information. He paid college students to attend practices and report on injuries. He paid equipment managers for inside information about game day conditions. He paid reporters for advanced knowledge of lineup changes. Information is leverage in betting markets. If you know something 15 minutes before the general public knows it, you can move lines, balance action, and eliminate risk. Frank Rosenthal was building an intelligence network before anyone understood what that meant. Then, Frank made a mistake. In 1961, he got arrested for bribing a college basketball player. The FBI had been investigating point-shaving schemes in NCAA basketball. They had wiretaps on several Chicago bookmakers. Frank's name came up. He was indicted on conspiracy charges related to fixing games. He didn't go to trial. The case was dismissed due to lack of evidence. But the arrest got Frank's name into federal law enforcement databases, and that would follow him for the rest of his life. After the arrest, Frank left Chicago, not because the outfit told him to, because he saw an opportunity. Las Vegas had just legalized sports betting in Nevada casinos. Before 1961, sports betting in Nevada was limited to handbook operations similar to Chicago's. But the state wanted to legitimize it, regulate it, and tax it. Casinos were now allowed to install sports books in-house, taking bets directly from customers. Frank Rosenthal saw what nobody else saw. If you could run a sports book inside a casino with official state approval, you could build the most profitable betting operation in American history. Legal protection, tourist traffic, unlimited capital. Frank moved to Las Vegas in 1962. He was 33 years old. He had $4,000 in cash. He had connections to Chicago, and he had a plan. Frank didn't open his own sports book. He didn't have a gaming license. He couldn't get one. His 1961 arrest made him ineligible, so Frank became a consultant. He approached the management of the Rose Bowl Sportsbook, a small independent betting parlor in Las Vegas, and offered his services. He'd redesigned their entire operation. New odds-setting systems, new risk management protocols, new customer acquisition strategies. In exchange, he wanted 15% of net profits. The Rose Bowl agreed. Within 6 months, Frank had tripled their revenue. Here's what Frank did. He created the first modern point spread system for football betting. Before Frank, most sports bets were straight moneyline bets. You bet on who would win. The problem with moneyline betting is it's hard to balance action when one team is heavily favored. If the Dallas Cowboys are playing a terrible team, everyone bets on Dallas. The bookmaker can't balance the action. Frank's solution was the point spread. Instead of betting on who wins, you bet on whether the favorite will win by more than a certain number of points. Cowboys are favored by 7 points. If you bet on the Cowboys, they have to win by more than 7 for you to win your bet. If you bet on the underdog, they can lose by 6 points and you still win your bet. This system creates balanced action. Half the bettors take Dallas, half take the underdog. The bookmaker is guaranteed profit from the commission. Frank Rosenthal didn't invent the point spread, but he perfected it. He refined the math. He developed models for setting lines that balanced action while protecting the house. By 1965, every major sportsbook in Las Vegas was using Frank's system. And Frank was consulting for 6 different operations, taking a cut from all of them. Here's where the Chicago outfit noticed. In 1968, Alan Glick, a San Diego real estate developer, was looking to buy casinos in Las Vegas. Glick had money. He'd made a fortune in real estate. But he didn't know anything about running casinos. The outfit did. Through intermediaries, the outfit arranged for Glick to receive $62.7 million in loans from the Teamsters Union Pension Fund. With that money, Glick purchased the Stardust, the Fremont, the Hacienda, and the Marina casinos. On paper, Glick owned them. In reality, the Chicago outfit controlled them, and they needed someone to run the operations, someone brilliant with numbers, someone who understood risk management, someone who wouldn't skim from the skim. They chose Frank Rosenthal. In 1971, Frank Rosenthal became the unofficial casino manager of the Stardust Hotel and Casino. He couldn't have an official title. He still couldn't get a gaming license, so his business card said Food and Beverage Director. But everyone in Las Vegas knew the truth. Frank Rosenthal ran the Stardust, and over the next 12 years, he would transform it into the most profitable casino in Nevada. Here's how Frank ran the Stardust. First, he completely redesigned the casino floor layout. He studied traffic patterns. He analyzed where customers walked, where they paused, where they spent money. He repositioned slot machines in high-traffic corridors. He placed table games near entrances to attract walk-in gamblers. He removed clocks, minimized windows, and controlled lighting to disorient customers and keep them gambling longer. These techniques are standard now. In 1971, they were revolutionary. Second, Frank installed the most sophisticated surveillance system in Las Vegas. He had cameras covering every table, every slot machine, every cashier cage. He hired retired police detectives to monitor feeds in real time. If a dealer was stealing, Frank knew within an hour. If a customer was counting cards, Frank knew before they left the table. Third, Frank rebuilt the sportsbook. He made it the centerpiece of the Stardust's operation. He created a theater-style betting parlor with massive projection screens showing live sports. He offered more betting options than any other casino in Nevada. You could bet on football, baseball, basketball, hockey, boxing, horse racing, and even political elections. Frank set lines that attracted action from professional gamblers and tourists alike. The Stardust Sportsbook became the model every other casino copied. But here's what made Frank Rosenthal invaluable to the Chicago outfit. He ran the skim. The skim was simple in concept, complex in execution. Nevada law required casinos to report all revenue to the State Gaming Control Board. That revenue was taxed. But if you could remove cash from the casino before it was officially counted and recorded, that cash was invisible, tax-free. The Chicago outfit's entire Las Vegas operation depended on the skim, and Frank Rosenthal engineered the most efficient skim system in mob history. Here's exactly how it worked. Every night, dealers and pit bosses would collect cash and chips from table games. That money went to the casino cage where cashiers would count it. The official count happened at the end of each shift. But before the official count, before the money was recorded in the casino's books, Frank's people would enter the count room and remove a percentage of the cash. Not all of it, just enough to stay under the regulatory threshold that triggered audits, usually between 8 and 12% of total cash handle. On a good night, the Stardust generated $2.5 million in cash revenue. 8% of that is $2,000. That's $2,000 in untaxed, unrecorded cash removed every single night. 7 nights a week. That's $1.4 million per week. That's $72.8 million per year. And that's conservative. Over 12 years, Frank Rosenthal's skim operation generated approximately $400 million for the Chicago outfit. Here's where Frank's brilliance becomes clear. He didn't just steal money. He optimized a criminal enterprise like it was a Fortune 500 company. He balanced the skim against revenue reporting to avoid suspicion. He diversified skim methods so no single technique was used too frequently. He rotated personnel so no one person controlled too much of the operation. He kept meticulous off-books records, tracking every dollar skimmed, every payment made, every person involved. Frank Rosenthal treated organized crime like a business. And it worked. For 12 years, the FBI couldn't prove anything. Nevada gaming regulators suspected the skim but couldn't document it. The IRS audited the Stardust multiple times and found nothing actionable. Frank's system was airtight, until it wasn't. The problem with being too successful is that everyone notices. By 1976, the Stardust was the most profitable casino in Las Vegas. It generated more revenue per square foot than Caesar's Palace. It had higher table game win percentages than the MGM Grand. It attracted high roller gamblers from across the country. And all of that success attracted attention. The Nevada Gaming Control Board started asking questions. Why was the Stardust so profitable? Who was really running the operation? Why was Frank Rosenthal, a known associate of organized crime, working as the food and beverage director when everyone knew he controlled the casino? In 1976, the Gaming Control Board ordered Frank to apply for a gaming license. If he wanted to keep working at the Stardust officially, he needed state approval. Frank knew he wouldn't get it. His 1961 arrest, his connections to Chicago, his refusal to testify before grand juries investigating organized crime. All of it disqualified him. But Frank applied anyway, and the hearings became a spectacle. The Nevada Gaming Commission held Frank Rosenthal's licensing hearing in January 1977. It lasted 3 days. Gaming Control Board investigators presented evidence of Frank's organized crime connections. They showed wiretap transcripts. They showed financial records. They showed Frank meeting with known mob figures. Frank's lawyer argued that Frank was a legitimate businessman being targeted for his association with people he'd known since childhood. The commission wasn't convinced. They denied Frank's license application. But here's what's important. They didn't ban Frank from the Stardust. They just said he couldn't have an official gaming license. So Frank stayed on as a consultant. Same job, same authority, same skim, just a different title. The denial was symbolic. It gave Nevada regulators political cover to say they were tough on organized crime. But it didn't change anything operationally. Frank Rosenthal kept running the Stardust, and the money kept flowing to Chicago. But the denied license had unintended consequences. It made Frank more visible, more famous, more of a target. In 1977, Frank started hosting a local television show called The Frank Rosenthal Show. It aired late night on a Las Vegas station. Frank would interview celebrities, athletes, and politicians. He'd talk about sports betting. He'd give gambling advice. It was surreal. A known mob associate hosting a talk show while running an illegal skim operation. But Frank loved the attention. He thought visibility would protect him. If he was a public figure, if people knew his name and face, the mob couldn't kill him without massive attention. Frank was right about that. But he was wrong about everything else. Because the real threat wasn't from the mob. It was from the FBI. And the FBI was about to bring down the entire operation. November 1978. The FBI obtained court authorization to install wiretaps in the Stardust's count room. They'd been investigating the skim for 6 years. They had informants. They had financial records. But they needed direct evidence. The wiretaps gave them that. For 3 months, federal agents listened to Frank's crew discussing the skim. They heard conversations about how much cash to remove. They heard discussions about payment schedules to Chicago bosses. They heard everything. On February the 7th, 1979, the FBI raided the Stardust. They arrested 4 count room supervisors. They seized financial records. They shut down the skim operation. Frank Rosenthal wasn't arrested. He was too smart to be in the count room during skim operations. He had plausible deniability. But his operation was finished. The Chicago outfit lost its most profitable revenue stream. And they blamed Frank. Here's where Frank's story diverges from Casino. In the movie, Sam Rothstein, the character based on Frank, loses everything because of his wife's affair with Nicky Santoro. Joe Pesci's character based on Tony Spilotro. That's Hollywood drama. The truth is simpler and more brutal. Frank's marriage to Geri McGee was a disaster. She was a former showgirl and chip hustler. She had addiction problems. She was unstable. But the marriage didn't destroy Frank's career. The FBI raid did. By March 1979, Frank was unemployable in Las Vegas. No casino would hire him. The Gaming Control Board was monitoring his every move. Chicago was furious about losing the skim, and Tony Spilotro, the outfit's enforcer in Las Vegas, was telling Chicago that Frank had become a liability. Tony Spilotro was a problem. He ran the outfit's street operations in Las Vegas. Burglaries, robberies, loan sharking, drug dealing. He was violent, impulsive, and reckless. He attracted police attention. Frank had spent years building a low-profile professional operation. Tony was the opposite. He wanted everyone to know he was the mob. The tension between Frank and Tony escalated throughout 1979 and 1980. Tony wanted more control over the casinos. Frank wanted Tony to stay away from legitimate operations. Chicago was caught in the middle. They valued Frank's professionalism, but they needed Tony's enforcement. October 4th, 1982. 8:20 a.m. The parking lot of Tony Roma's restaurant on East Sahara Avenue, Las Vegas. Frank Rosenthal walked out of the restaurant after an early breakfast meeting. He got into his 1981 Cadillac Eldorado. He put the key in the ignition. He turned it. The car exploded. The blast was massive. It shattered windows in the restaurant. It flipped the Cadillac onto its side. Witnesses thought Frank was dead. He wasn't. The bomb had been placed incorrectly. It was positioned behind the driver's seat near the gas tank. When it detonated, most of the force went downward and backward, not into the passenger compartment. Frank's seat absorbed the shockwave. He was thrown from the vehicle, but survived with minor burns and bruises. He was in the hospital for 2 days. He walked out alive. Nobody was ever charged with the bombing. But everyone in Las Vegas knew who ordered it. The Chicago outfit wanted Frank dead. Not because he'd stolen from them. He hadn't. Not because he'd cooperated with the FBI. He never did. They wanted him dead because his usefulness had expired. The skim was gone. Frank couldn't get a gaming license. He couldn't run casinos anymore, and he knew too much. Dead men don't testify. Frank survived because of a mechanical error. A bomb maker placed the explosive 3 inches too far from the driver's seat. 3 inches saved Frank Rosenthal's life. After the bombing, Frank left Las Vegas. He moved to Southern California, then Florida. Then he disappeared into quiet retirement. He never testified against the Chicago outfit. He never cooperated with federal investigations. He never wrote a tell-all book. He just vanished. Tony Spilotro wasn't as lucky. In June 1986, Tony and his brother Michael were lured to a meeting in Chicago. They thought it was a promotion. Tony was going to be made. Instead, they were beaten to death with baseball bats and buried in an Indiana cornfield. The outfit killed them for attracting too much attention, for being too violent, for making Las Vegas too hot. Alan Glick, the frontman who'd owned the casinos on paper, cooperated with federal investigators. He testified before grand juries. He provided documentation of the skim operation. In exchange, he received immunity. He kept his real estate fortune. He moved to San Diego and lived quietly for the rest of his life. Geri McGee, Frank's ex-wife, died in 1982 from a drug overdose in Los Angeles. She was 46 years old. She'd been addicted to cocaine and prescription pills for years. Her death had nothing to do with the mob. It was just the predictable end of an addictive spiral. The other Stardust skim operators went to prison. 4 count-room supervisors were convicted of conspiracy and fraud. They served between 5 and 12 years in federal prison. None of them cooperated with prosecutors. None of them implicated Frank Rosenthal. The Chicago outfit leadership was indicted in 1983 as part of a massive RICO case targeting organized crime families across the country. Several bosses went to prison. Others died before trial. The outfit's control over Las Vegas ended. Frank Rosenthal lived until 2008. He died of a heart attack in Miami Beach at age 79. He spent his final 26 years in quiet retirement. He never returned to Las Vegas. He never ran another casino. He gave a few interviews over the years, mostly to correct inaccuracies in casino. He maintained until his death that he'd been a legitimate casino operator who'd been unfairly targeted because of his Chicago associations. That's technically true. Frank Rosenthal was the best casino operator in Las Vegas history. He understood gambling, risk management, customer psychology, and operational efficiency better than anyone in Nevada. The fact that he used those skills to run a criminal enterprise doesn't change the underlying brilliance. Frank wasn't arrested because he wasn't directly involved in the physical skim. He designed the system, but he had layers of insulation. Other people handled the cash. Other people transported it to Chicago. Other people distributed it. Frank just created the blueprint. And blueprints aren't enough for criminal convictions. Here's what Casino got wrong. The movie made Frank Rosenthal look like a tragic figure destroyed by love and betrayal. That's not his story. Frank Rosenthal was destroyed by his own success. He built a system so efficient that it generated $400 million for the Chicago outfit over 12 years. That kind of money creates enemies. It attracts FBI scrutiny. It makes you indispensable until you're not. And the moment you're not indispensable, you become a liability. Frank survived because the bomb was placed wrong. 3 inches. That's the margin between life and death in organized crime. Not loyalty, not betrayal, just mechanical error and random chance. Frank Rosenthal spent his entire life calculating odds, managing risk, and eliminating chance from gambling operations. But in the end, his survival came down to pure luck. The one thing he'd spent his career trying to control. The real lesson of Frank Rosenthal isn't about crime. It's about competence. Frank was too good at his job. He made too much money. He attracted too much attention. And in criminal organizations, competence is only valuable until it becomes dangerous. Then it becomes a reason to kill you. Frank understood this. That's why he never testified. That's why he never cooperated. That's why he disappeared after the bombing. He knew that survival meant silence, and silence meant irrelevance. Frank Rosenthal traded power for survival. He traded influence for invisibility. He spent his final decades as a forgotten man living on a pension in Miami Beach while Hollywood made a movie about his life starring Robert De Niro. That's the price of surviving the mob. You don't get to tell your own story. You just get to watch someone else tell it wrong. If you want to understand how Las Vegas really worked, how the mob built a billion-dollar gambling empire, and how one man's genius created and destroyed that empire, subscribe to this channel. We're documenting the true stories Hollywood gets wrong. Drop a comment. Do you think Frank Rosenthal was a criminal mastermind or just a brilliant businessman working for the wrong people? Let me know. This is Mafia Talks, the real stories behind the movies. Until next time.